I wanted to sort of move us on now to Nottingham, just to hear where they've got to. I think they were incredibly quick off the blocks. They launched their Civic Agreement as the Universities for Nottingham, maybe that was 18 months ago. But I think what is so wonderful is that they've now had some real experience of making that agreement work and some real learning along the way. So we've invited two people. There's Fiona from Nottingham Trent, who's head of civic engagement, and there's Leonie from University of Nottingham, who's head of public affairs there, and they're going to share with us the journey they've been on.
So we're looking at our current civic partnership. All of these signatories to our agreement are co-signing those commitments. So our current membership, as you can see, has a bit of a healthcare focus, and I think that's really a reflection of where and when we got to this point. So we launched right back really at in the COVID pandemic, and so as we were working through, these were really the key partners. We were working very strongly, as a colleague from Manchester said. A lot of our partnership was really raised in those early COVID days, and it's really important. As we're going forward, we're thinking very much about who else could we bring into this coalition. So the FE partnership is something that's notably missing here, and Nottingham Trent University in particular have really strong relationships with FE partners, and so we're looking at how we bring those in potentially as co-signatories to a future agreement. It's going to be really interesting to see how that works. We set ourselves a target. So when we launched this, we were also talking to a much broader range of partners. So we were thinking as well about some of those real key civic-based corporates. So, Nottingham, for example, we have Boots as a big corporate who are really active in the civic space. We chose not to include them in our formal agreement because we took a decision that we were looking for anchor institutions. Really, there's institutions that already have a civic remit and role in our areas. But we're really interested in how else we can bring them as we move forward. We'll definitely be looking at how we can look perhaps on specific initiatives and bring those in. But one of the things that we'd be really interested to hear from people here is, has anybody given any thought to other types of, not a signatory, but a sort of corporate external member, or, how are you bringing in those other partners who are going to be really key to delivering some of these initiatives, because, as we go forward, we're going to need them as well. So moving on to the next slide. Just quickly, so this is really our timeline. So we launched it in January 2020, like I say, heady pre-pandemic days when we all met up in a big room and had a big sort of kicked off what we hoped was going to be a big, broad conversation. And we were really thinking, not just those anchor institution partners, but how can we engage the public? How can we engage those core corporates? How could we bring people together and decide what are the themes that we want to co-create, and how can we build initiatives underneath them? And then, of course, really rapidly, we found ourselves in a very different world. We were all sort of retreated back to Zoom and Teams and trying to navigate our way in a really different world. We also found ourselves with really different priorities. So, as I say, we were all sort of thrown into a world where we were very much fighting fires. But just going back to that January 2020, we started by launching those, what I think everybody would recognise as the traditional impact assessment. So we had an economic impact assessment, although for the first time we did this jointly as the two institutions. So we worked out all our metrics together and put those out there. Alongside that, we tried to capture the social, cultural impacts. And so the picture on this screen is Husnagul, who's a degree apprenticeship student at Nottingham Trent University doing civil engineering in a placement. So we tried to pick out individuals who really characterised some of the ways in which we were already doing civic work with our area. We wanted to sell, because, as I'll come back to, a lot of this is about comms, a lot of this is about articulating some of the things we already do. So that was our sort of launch event. We developed the Civic University Agreement under COVID conditions. It was really challenging. But we got to a point where we had our early Civic University Agreement. We've got 14 initiatives under the 5 themes, which are economic prosperity, educational opportunity, health and well-being, environmental sustainability, and unlocking the universities. I thought, Richard, as you spoke, that really similar areas. I suspect everybody's working across really similar areas. Our unlocking the universities was our sort of interesting catch-all. So where I think the first 4 were very much joint commitments across all the organisations to some of the big challenges. The last one was very much how can we ensure that local partners can access university expertise, and thinking about how, what's locked up inside the universities and how we make that more accessible. So that last one was really our sort of university specific commitment, where the others were much broader, and we really were asking all the organisations to commit to those. And then just moving on, we've obviously started to see progress now. So we're, like I say, 18 months in from signing. As ever in universities, nothing moves massively fast, particularly when you're working with such a lot of organisations and trying to get things achieved. I genuinely think the process of working together has been a really massive step forward, certainly between ourselves and Trent University. So I think, if you go back 4 or 5 years, there really wasn't much of a working relationship at all. And partly because of COVID, partly because of the similar reasons that others have echoed in terms of having to work together and really having to think about what we do with our students. But partly through the Universities for Nottingham process, we really have brought forward that partnership working, and genuinely I think that's our biggest achievement to date. On top of that, we are starting to see some really tangible things which we're able to put forward. So green rewards, which is the picture here, this is a carbon footprint app, so helping people to track their own measures that they can take in their individual lives. This app was rolled out first in Trent University. We at the University of Nottingham decided to do the same process because now we can jointly capture the impact that we're all having, and it's just in the last couple of weeks been adopted by all 9 district councils across Nottinghamshire. So it's rolling out to other people, and just as a way of us really working together on an issue that's so massively important to all of us. As well as this, we've established a Universities for Nottingham expert advisory group. That's about how we can harness some of our academic expertise to inform some of the local challenges. So we're creating a forum where the local councils and those other institutions can come to us proactively and say, here's a local challenge that we want to harness your university expertise. We're working with SMEs, again, as we've always done, but we're really joining it up more coherently and making it more of a centralised offer that we're able to put forward. We've got a joint Universities of Sanctuary bid, which is going to be supporting local refugees. Again, working together in a really important way. By joining up with our healthcare partners, we've developed a new medtech offer. We're also working, and Richard, I saw this in yours as well, on our healthcare workforce. So for the first time, we've been able to really proactively plan and commission the placements that allow us to get more nursing students in the right places. So particularly thinking about mental health nursing. So it's a young initiative, but we really are feeling like we've got some good progress that we're making, and we feel really confident going on to the next step of our refreshed agreement. So just really some observations from the 18 months that we've been doing this. We have had a continually adapting, evolving approach to this. It's been really, really interesting. Like I say, back in January 2020, pre-COVID, we were just in a vastly different place. Throughout the last 18 months, we've navigated all of the changes, and we probably haven't done everything in the most logical way. So I think if we were going back 18 months, there'd be tons of things that we would have done differently. And we're going to come on to some of the specific lessons we've learned. But, just thinking things around key partners, actually, even when we thought about our healthcare partners, we missed out one of the healthcare providers because we didn't really have that pre-existing relationship, and they were sort of in a slightly different space. We brought them in later we sort of negotiated and navigated that, but certainly we would have rather done that in a different way. We also didn't really get the chance to do as much community listening as we would have hoped to do. So I think, again, really a casualty of the pandemic, but we're really keen, I think, to go out and to do much more of that listening. So obviously, the councils represent those interests and they represent the public, and they bring those views in to a certain extent. But I think we've felt the lack of having a direct dialogue with the community, and we're very keen to return to that now as we move forward, and perhaps put in place a sort of longer planning stretch between this refresh and the next time we return to the agreement in itself. I think as well, we've sort of, and similarly, I think everybody's probably facing the same thing, but we've been trying to pitch those really big ideas, and we've been trying to land some of the big commitments, and maybe missed some of the smaller seeds of the ideas. And I think there was an opportunity to bring some more things underneath, and as you'll see sort of when we move on, our agreement is evolving. We're just 18 months in, and that's not really a big time frame in terms of delivering some of the big commitments that we set out, but we're already feeling that we need to refresh, we need to sort of backfill, and we need to make some small amends in what we're doing, and that this feels like the right time to do it. But we do feel now that what we've done is we've managed to open a load of doors. We've really managed to navigate. We've managed to find the people who we can work with across all those organisations, and just put it forward in a much better way. So the other observation from us is really on the importance of communications. So again, and Richard, I think you made the point about some things are already in planning, some things were already going to happen, and it's about centering them and putting them into a context that helps us talk about the public. And Paul had sort of similarly described it, some of it as nudging and rebadging and enabling. But I think we should be really we should feel very legitimate about our use of this as a comms tool. So it definitely is not a PR exercise. We fundamentally have seen some massive changes in the way that we work and the things that we've been able to do, and that's both internal and external. But part of it is about retrofitting that narrative, and we don't feel apologetic about it, because there is some really fantastic stuff happening across our organisations already. Volunteering, loads of our academics work on fantastic local projects, loads of our students do really important local initiatives, and there are loads more opportunities. And so for us, there is an importance in demonstrating our value, because partly in demonstrating our value, that enables us to do more of it. When the public recognises the things that we already do, that gives us that institutional permission to take it forward and build on it. Part of it is an internal comms exercise. It really is. Part of it is about showing colleagues internally that if they engage in this piece of work, then there will be some reward, at least in terms of thinking through the impact of that and how we can help them demonstrate it. It also shows people that there's a way of navigating these links. So if you're an academic and you have a project that needs to work with a council, by and large they're going to the person that they've met in a certain context. But if we can say, if you work locally, we can provide that networking position, we can hook you up, we can link in because we already have existing relationships, then there's an incentive there to do that piece of work that would have happened anyway with a local audience. And I think that's really important too. And let's be clear as well, it's also about having some really tangible stuff to push back when a lot of our relationships in a local space are about students and are about the impact, and particularly over the last 18 months and with COVID, we've spent a lot of time defending ourselves as universities for bringing these awful students who are in their communities knocking over bins and having parties late at night, and some of this is really important for keeping those relationships strong and enabling us to do all the other things that we need to do. So and Richard, I think you made this point that part of it is about giving ourselves the institutional permission to do that. And so, Fiona, can I bring you in to talk about what we've learned?
Thanks, Leonie. Of course, yes. Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to take us through the next few slides, mindful, of course, of time and the opportunity for us to have a fuller discussion after the presentations. So I'm going to take you through five things. Obviously there's lots of different things that we've all learned, and we could talk about that for a very long time, but in effect we've sort of coalesced the lessons around 5 key things. The first one is start with what's already there. If we hold that slide, Ellen, I'm going to go through them all before I dig in a little bit. Thank you. So we're going to thanks, start with what's already there. And then the second one is creating adaptable and agile infrastructure. We've talked a little bit about that today. The third one is to leave some space to enable us to explore and to be organic, to make sure that this is a sort of a living, breathing arrangement that can respond to different policy changes and different landscape changes. The fourth one is the value and importance of personal connections, particularly with our partners, and Leonie outlined who the signatory partners are in this agreement, that clearly the partnership is broader than that. And then the fifth one is the permission to collaborate, which is what this agreement gives us. And I think it's important to highlight that as 2 very different institutions who found a great way to work together, we don't do everything together. This agreement is bounded around the areas in which we collaborate, but we still both operate sort of separately, and it's very healthy, and we work in a kind of no surprises sort of way. We talk openly about bids we might look at and different things. So Ellen, thank you. If you could move on to the next slide for me, thank you. So mindful of time, starting with what's already there. So just briefly picking out a couple of things. As colleagues around the virtual table know, developing a Civic University Agreement is an absolutely massive piece of work. And so it's about starting with what one has and building from there. That's worked well for us. And, you know, as large institutions, we'll never know what's happening across our universities. We won't know everything. So start small and develop outwards, I would say. Ellen, could you move on to the next one if you could? Thank you. Being agile, so we touched on that. Making sure that, you know, as large, highly governed institutions, we've not sort of tied ourselves up in a governance knot. We've been able to make sure that we can develop systems and processes that mean the Civic Agreement is well governed, but it's not sort of so bound in red tape that we can't adapt to new things. So, for example, a key area of interest for both universities and for many of us around the table is around women's safety. And there's some excellent work that academics from both universities are doing. And we're building on that, and we're expanding that to include other partners. And now we're going to be embedding that into our new Civic Agreement. So that's just an example of how we need to be agile so we can capitalise on opportunities. Could you move this slide on? Thanks, Ellen. So leaving space to be organic, making sure that as we look at the refreshed agreement, that we are working with our different partners to find out what they would like from the agreement. With the agreement sort of between the 2 universities and the signatory partners, we have to work really hard to make sure that we're delivering on what the wider partnership would like, and that there's clearly a piece of activity that each partner is involved with in some way, that we're trying to ensure that we can push it in the best sense of the word, the different activities across the partners, and make sure that partners are taking the lead on different pieces of work. Otherwise, you know, we're not going to be able to really get the impact that we would like. I could talk more about governance, but I won't go into that. And I know governance has come up a few times, that kind of mindful of time. So making sure that we can be organic and we can respond to things. Thanks, Ellen. Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, the personal connections and patience is key. I think personal connections, particularly with the signatory partners, because we need to make sure, and it's been difficult with COVID, that the different colleagues within the two universities, both our sponsors and the operational team, that we're working with the different layers of partners within different organisations to make sure that the civic agreement's meeting their needs, to make sure that they're involved deeply in helping to deliver at least one initiative. I think the other point I'd just say about that is that when we work in collaboration, both as the two universities and with the other partners, that slows us down. It's obviously vitally important to make sure that we're working together to co-develop and co-deliver, but I think we have to be very pragmatic about how long that dialogue takes, but it's a vitally important thing to get right. And I think it's sort of been brought to the fore that we have quite different different institutional cultures, and we found a really good way across the two universities to work together and to sort of challenge and to really find the best way forward. Could you move on this slide, Ellen, if you could? Thank you. I think the other thing just to highlight is that through the Civic Agreement, it's actually given us an institutional permission to collaborate. And what we're finding now is that academics will start working together across the different institutions. So we're working to develop a health bid at the moment, and those conversations are almost starting to happen without us, which is without us as a kind of UFN team, and that's been absolutely brilliant to sort of know that people can just pick up the phone or meet with colleagues and feel empowered to work together to help to deliver the Civic Agreement. And on to the last slide, if you would, please. So as mentioned, we're in the process of refreshing the agreement. It's been in place for a year and a half. I don't think we'd advocate that we should refresh it every year and a half. It's just that some of the things that were put into the agreement around COVID recovery, we've delivered those, and other things have become business as usual. So working with the leaders and chief execs of the partner organisations, we've gone through a process of finding out their ideas and then going through a sort of filtration process to really embed that into the new agreement. And if there's time, or subsequently, we could share with people some of the other things that Leonie mentioned some, but that there are others too. And then making sure that we can really come up with a really great comms plan, which involves the refresh of the website, a social media strategy, and ensuring that we can really bring that to life. And continuing to work together around accessing funding, looking at how we evaluate the work of universities for Nottingham. And these are all things that we're starting to bring in as the Civic Agreement matures and as our working relationships mature as well. So I'll just close there and hand back to you, Paul, to take us through the next steps.
Thank you so much for sharing those lessons learnt. It's such impressive work, and I thought those I'm sure those lessons have resonated with everybody. And in a minute I'll sort of pick up sort of comments and questions in chat. There was just one thing that just sort of jumped out at me as you had both sort of spoken about the work that you did, and both of you have referred to this a little bit, which is about communications and how we talk about civic and how we describe it. And I wondered to what extent what you'd learned about the terms civic and civic agreements and so on, and how those had sort of worked with your partners. And I was very struck. I made a comment in the comments earlier about how Sheffield Hallam had sort of framed it. And when you just talked about our economy and jobs and our health and well-being, there was just something very personal about that sense of being in a relationship with your communities and with your city that felt very simple and very attractive to me, whereas sometimes the sort of civic language can sound a bit sort of highfalutin. I just wondered how are you sort of committed to this notion of civic? Is that working for you, Fiona and Leonie and Richard, or how are you feeling about how to communicate this ambition to work better together?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's something that we as universities have been getting to grips with over the time that we've been doing this, and before actually. So I think even from as I said, we started by trying to draw together that social impact as well as that economic impact, and to do that jointly, because it was very much, I think both our institutions have a commitment at the top to think about Civic and to think about what's our joint impact on our place. And I think, as I sort of mentioned as well, there's a positive impact and there are some negative parts of the impact as well, particularly when you think about a large student population in a small area. And so it's very much given us a bit more of a framework. And, I know from our side as well, we've really enhanced the role of our internal civic facing work as well. So we have a civic committee, which we've always had, but that is very much growing in stature. So I think it's helped us to articulate and to think about what civic means and to think about our impact and our footprint, I suppose, in our local area.
So it's been a really useful kind of trigger to get those conversations happening. I wondered, Richard, how are you feeling about being civic?
I mean, I think the civicness and the kind of civic agenda and the civic language works really well in the institution. I think one of my reflections on engagement is that, if you like, that whole institution's civic approach is probably of much more interest within the university than it is to our communities and partners, who are much more interested in very specific things. And I don't think many of our partners, or indeed many of our communities, are terribly interested in thinking about the totality of the Hallam civic contribution, but they are interested in very specific things. And I think this is where some of the comms, you have to be really light on your feet in terms of what is going to connect. Presenting, a coherent overall approach is kind of interesting. And I, for me personally, that kind of strategic coherence is really fascinating. But I'm not sure that's the line I'd go out with in some of our public comms, where, for example, doubling our contribution to the local public health workforce absolutely lands as a message. So it's kind of the institutional perspective versus what are people interested in is I think an interesting one to explore.
Yeah, great.
I just add Paul as well. Sort of for us, civic runs through, I guess, the DNA of the institution. I think it was interesting when Richard put up the polling work that Sheffield Hallam had done. I think that's something we, speaking sort of perhaps for both institutions, Leonie and I, but at some point we want to relook at that as well, because I think there's certainly a long way to go to help to work with lots of different community members around the universities, sort of just outside of our campus, if you like. And I think we've got a long way to go there in terms of how we actually can demonstrate and show the value of the universities for people who perhaps didn't have the opportunity to go to university. And I think how we actually work with individual community members and community groups is something we really need to start to unpack as we sort of further mature this, because I think we're just working at a sort of institutional level at the moment.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and just earlier, Julian sort of raised some comments around sort of partnership working, and there was another prompt from Julian in the chat around, I guess, the impressive number of partners in proportion to the challenges that then poses around speed of being able to work and operate. I'm sure everyone is trying to sort of balance that, but I wondered if you had any reflections about that.
Perhaps if I kick off on that one, we published sort of very clear governance structures, which we co-designed. So to give you an example briefly, we have a leaders forum, which sort of sits across the top, and that's the vice chancellors of both institutions and the chief execs of the partner organisations, plus where their local authorities, political leaders as well. And then below that, for want of a better expression, we have a programme management board, which is made up of the two sponsors and the leads of each of the different work streams. And really those are the mechanisms for decision making. I think we find it, it's been a learning process in terms of developing papers and how much, you leave for decision making, how much you try to sort of preempt. Yeah. But I think part of the value of that is the work in between with different partners. So I think in a nutshell, we co-developed the governance structures. They're working well, but they're onerous to manage, I think is probably fair to say. That would be a personal reflection. But I think we've got it right now, and I think there's enough pull and push from the different partners, and enough of a way of working together to really drive forward different agendas. And I think, as Leonie highlighted earlier, things like increasing the number of nursing students is a real tangible outcome that wouldn't have happened without the agreement.
Yeah. And just picking up a question from Mariana, who's asking about the impact for the students to be engaged with communities in terms of educational practice. I wondered how important a thread that was, and what you were learning about what's possible in that area. I don't know whether Richard, maybe just popping back to Sheffield Hallam for a minute.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I think we do want. I mean, the civic agenda is as important to many of our students as it is to staff in the institution. We do like to think, and with some of our language has been around the Hallam community being a community of 35,000 people who are a fantastic resource for the region, and we've used. Our students are involved in a range of activities. One of the commitments we've got on the education strand is using our students as mentors for young people, particularly in disadvantaged areas, coming through into post-16 level, and to create a one-to-one mentoring relationship to help them, particularly as they've come through COVID, thinking about their next choices in life. So that's a really tangible example, but also thinking about the civic contribution as part of the work experience that students have. Again, one of our commitments is all our students will have work experience in each year of their degree, and trying to help students to understand that as part of a wider civic contribution. I mean, again, it helps. Does it help? I was going to say it helps that so many of them come from the region. Actually, I'm not sure that is true. I think students, actually, whether they're from the region or not, can be can feel a strong sense of civic contribution. But I think the student aspect of this is really critical as well.
Great. So we'll pick up on that. But just before we close, Richard, Fiona, Leonie, any sort of final comments that you'd like to make?
The fact that this is a living, breathing document that needs to be able to respond to different policy changes and opportunities would be one thing. And my second reflection is how we work with the partners to diffuse the agreement through different layers of the organisation. So it's not just held at within one or two individuals. They'd be my final reflections, Paul. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just throw in two slightly different ones. One is I do think this is such an important agenda for the sector. I think we can't underestimate the importance of this in the current political, social and economic context. Fantastic that we are working together and learning from each other. And I think just my final one from an institutional perspective is I think there's enormous power in having this genuinely embedded as part of institutional identity. It ought to be, it can be, and I think finding ways to really get this to feel like this is part of what we're about as institutions is enormously valuable.
Great, thank you. Leonie.
Just a final thought from me. I think the key thing that I've learned, and the key thing that I've reflected on the last 18 months is really the stuff that's going on under the radar, behind the scenes, that's creating the pathways between us, and the institutional permission piece really can't be overstated. I feel like we've been given permission from the very top of our organisation to go out there and make these partnerships and to proactively deliver things that are of benefit to us all. And when we think about the comms of it, it isn't all big and it isn't all sexy, and some of it really genuinely 50 new mental health nurses, that's actually quite a small scale, but just where that's come from and the pathways that have been created in order to deliver that, what that will deliver over all the future years really can't be underestimated.